Hello everybody and welcome. This is Dave Bredhauer with MemoryBox. Thanks so much for stopping by today. I'm going to give you a few ideas about using die cuts to create interesting flaps on the front of your cards. Sometimes you want to mix it up a little bit and make things a little bit more interesting. And there's a ton of different ways to do it, but I'm going to share a few ideas I have with you today. Okay, the first one is the stamp and die cut center flap. Now this is going to make an A2 size card. This is an A2 size card, but I've cut out two different pieces of white paper here that are slightly larger. You can see that first one is a 1/2 inch longer at the bottom, and the second one is a 1/2 inch longer at the bottom and the top. Now you're going to see why we do this. So we're going to put some score lines on these pieces. The first one is the 6 inch long one. We're just going to put a 1/2 inch inside score line from the end there. We're going to do the same thing with the bigger one, 1/2 inch on one end, and then 1/2 inch on the other end. So just for clarity, here they are compared to an A2 size card. You can see it's a 1/2 inch longer than a regular size card, and the other one is a 1/2 inch longer on both ends, bottom and top. So this is the reason we're going to do it that way. We're going to go ahead and do some stamping. I'm going to go ahead and affix that to a stamp positioner. And that score line is at the top, and I've adjusted it so that that piece of paper is lined up along the 1 inch mark on there. I'm just going to use a little bit of tape to hold things down in place while I get ready to stamp. Now the image I'm using today is from the Wild Rose Stem stamp set. It's just that little stem with the blossoms on it. And I've already positioned it so that it cuts across the paper. I'm going to stamp it gently. Make sure I get a good impression, and then I'll go ahead and pull that off. Now you're going to be stamping that second piece of paper, the longer piece of paper. Again, align it with that 1 inch mark because we want this image to be stamped exactly in the same space as we did for that first card. You'll see why in a bit. Aligning these will make things a lot easier later on when you're trying to get the die cuts in just the right spot. Now this image is a little bit delicate, so I sometimes use a towel to rub the ink onto the stamped image so I don't press too hard. If I press too hard, sometimes it smooshes out a little bit and the fine lines become a little bit too dense. Okay, I have both stamped images here. When I line them up at the top, you see the one on the left is shorter and the one on the right is the longer one. The one on the right, the one with the score at the top and the bottom, is the one that we're going to die cut out. So I just affix the matching die right over the image, and then you can see it's kind of right in the middle of that piece of paper. Just put a little bit of tape on there to secure it and run it through your die cut machine. That's more or less going to cut your piece of paper in half so that it's sort of a centered die cut right in the middle of that piece of paper. Peel everything off gently. You're going to want to keep the top and the bottom for this project, and that cutout bloom you can use for another project later on. Now here's the shorter piece. We're just going to cut right along that score line because we don't need that extra piece anymore. You'll see why in a second. This is our base layer that we're going to put the flap onto. So see how we have that top and bottom? It's been scored, so it's going to land right on top of that base layer. So here you can see you can adjust the top flap there so that the score line's right at the top of the base layer, and you take the second flap, put it towards the bottom, and get that adjusted as well. Now before I glue it on, I'm going to decorate it just a little bit. So this is the top flap. I'm putting a little bit of ink on there just to give it a little bit of color to make things, I don't know, a little bit more interesting. I'm using some peacock feathers and some mowed lawn right along that die cut edge, and then off to the end of the flap, right over the score line. I'll do that on the top flap, and I'll also do it here again on the bottom flap. Now you can do lots of things here to decorate the flaps, but I wanted to keep it simple since we're focusing on how to cut the flaps themselves. Once you've got that all done, we're going to go ahead and get that glued onto that base layer. Now, I like to use a strong adhesive, so some double stick tape is usually what I'll go for something like this. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that's going to line up in just the right spot. Now I want to fold that right along where that score line is. You can fold it, use your finger or bone folder to get a nice fold there. And once you've exposed that adhesive, Then you're just going to adjust that and get it lined up so that the flap is right where it needs to be. And you'll repeat the same process with the other end. A little bit of double stick tape so that that flap is held down really securely. Get it nice and close to the edge so that the flap is sure to stick onto it. Fold that down, use your finger to get a nice score. Probably a bone folder would be better. And get that adjusted on the end so it lines up nicely with the image. Now you have a flap at the bottom and the top. Now this technique will work with lots of different stamped images. It just needs to be long enough to cut across the entire card so that you can create a top and bottom flap to open up and reveal the message below. Once you get that formula for the 1/2" score marks at the top and the top and bottom of the second one, it's really easy to position and line these things up. And you can create a really interesting card this way. I just used some simple coloring to get that stamped image all colored in and a little bit of glitter glue to make the center stand out. Okay, easy peasy. All right, well, on to the next one. We're going to do just a plain old die cut to make a flap in the middle. Now the process is similar, but since we're not using a stamped image, there's a little bit of difference in how things get scored. I've got a 6.5" top and bottom scored piece of paper. That's the orange piece of paper, 1/2" on the inside of both of those. And I'm going to go ahead and die cut that with the Hello Topper die from Birch Press. I'm just going to stick that kind of towards the center, maybe a little bit more towards the bottom of that card. Get it all lined up, and you're going to send that through your die cut machine. Now this particular die has 2 pieces. It's got a shadow, and that's what I'm sending through right now. And it's also got a hello that works with it. Now after you've got that sent through, you'll have a top and bottom flap again with a 1/2" score mark on either end, and you can see how those line up and will fit together almost like a puzzle. Now you're going to fold and score your flaps just like we learned for the first project. Same idea, get a good nice fold on there. And we're going to be attaching them to the base layer, just a 4¼ by 5½ white rectangle. That white rectangular piece doesn't have an extra score mark on it, and it's not oversized because we're not doing any stamping on it. We're just going to be putting a die cut flap on it. Okay, so let's continue the process. You're going to go ahead and put that flap right on top of the base card. Make sure it's stuck to that adhesive really well, nice and lined up. And I like to test it a few times before I go on to the next step, just to make sure I have things in the right position. Might need to trim the sides a little bit if things are a little off center, but it doesn't take too much adjustment. Now I'm going to go ahead and put that bottom flap on, but you're going to see that it's not quite going to meet. It's because that fold around the edges is preventing those from completely touching. So you probably will have to trim off a little 1/8" piece from the end. It's a really easy adjustment. It kind of changes each time depending on exactly how big your pieces of paper are, but it's really easy to fix. Just trim a little bit off the base and then go ahead and secure that flap on the bottom and it'll fit just fine. Real easy. Okay, so we're going to finish up this super simple card. This is the hello that works with the shadow there. You'll affix that on there, and then I've just cut the floating butterfly out from Memory Box in some glitter paper. And I think the yellow probably works a little bit better than the red. You can make a whole set of these real easy. It's a real quick cut, no positioning involved like you do with stamping. But let's say you want it to be a little bit more decorative and colorful. Well, we're going to do the same thing as we did before. We have our base layer, we've cut out our top and bottom flaps, and we're going to align things so that the top flap goes on the top and the bottom flap goes on the bottom. Remember, you might need to trim the bottom a little bit to get that bottom flap to work. And once you got that all cut, make sure that it goes together nicely, and then go ahead and secure that adhesive on the back of the flap. Real easy. You'll see that these things are pretty easy to put together. Okay, so time to decorate it. Let's get some pattern paper on there. So I've got the Springtime Bouquet 6x6 pack from Memory Box. I'm choosing a stripe, nice bright pink stripe, and I want to use that on the bottom flap of my card. So I'll just run that through the die cut machine with the Hello Topper die, trim off the bottom and the sides, and that fits perfectly on the flap of that card. And I'll just add the hello and the butterfly, and you have a decorated card where it's contrasting color on the top and a decorative pattern on the bottom. Oh, but wait folks, there's more. I saw some washi tape on my desk and I thought, I wonder if this will work. So I'm going to put some washi tape on my card. And you notice that little piece of paper that I have stuck to the washi roll? That helps things not rip. Have you ever had that problem where you're trying to pull a piece of washi tape off the roll and it starts ripping and becomes shredded ribbons of washi tape? So if you put little pieces of paper in there to use as a handle as you go, this will prevent that from happening. You can see it's easy to pull on that handle and keeps that in even pressure across the pull as you pull that washi tape, and it won't rip then. So a little tip for you today. Now I'm going to go ahead and pretty much leave everything on there. Maybe I'll pull that part off. And I'm going to die cut this using the Hello Topper die. It's the same process. I've got my score on the top and my score on the bottom. This is my oversized piece that's going to make the flaps. But I've got a piece of washi tape on there. And I wanted to see if I could do a decorative technique on the top and then pull the washi tape off the bottom so it's a solid bottom. And I wasn't so sure that this was going to work. There's a lot of pressure when it goes through a die cut machine, and I thought that washi tape might not want to come off the paper once I'm done. So anyways, the big reveal in a second. That extra washi tape, I'm just going to fold around the sides, make sure that that's nice and clean along the edges. You could trim it off too with scissors or whatever, but that's what it looks like at the top. And then I'm going to gently pull off the washi tape on the bottom. Now, this is a little bit of a slow process. I've sped up the video here, but you can see you have to kind of take your time. It's kind of like peeling an apple all in one big long peel. I didn't want anything to rip, so I was very careful, but it all came off. And so you can see you can put a pattern on the top real easy with some wide washi tape, and then the bottom comes off. It was a very happy day when I learned this, so I want you to look through your washi stash and think of other ways that you can send that through with a die cut. Okay, last idea of the video. We're going to do that stamp positioning technique with a flap again, but we're just doing one flap. So I've got a white rectangular card here. This is our base. I'm lining it up with the 2 mark, and the reason why I've shifted it over is because my stamp is a little bit wide. You'll see in a second. So I've fit that, so it's just going to do the corner of that base piece. This is the Cherry Blossom Wreath stamp set from Memory Box. It's got a bunch of little cherry blossom blooms, but I'm using the big wreath component. The idea is the wreath is going to show through on the base, and then the flap is going to cover the rest of the card kind of up above it. So I've got that stamped out. I'll go ahead and put my flap on top. That's the one that has the 1/2 inch score mark at the top there. Again, line it up to the 2. You want to make sure you're stamping in the same place that you did the base card. This is my flap, so it's 4 1/4 inches wide, same as the base card, but it is 6 inches long and scored 1/2 inch from the top. It's going to make my flap. Now you don't have to worry about getting a really good stamped image on the flap because basically we're going to be cutting that off. Now I'll take my time positioning the matching die for the wreath onto that piece of paper. And you'll see after we run this through the machine, that whole bottom right corner is going to come off, and all we're going to have left is the upper portion for the flap. So think about what you have in your die collection. I have an oversized wreath here, but you don't necessarily have to have something this big to make the flap at the bottom. Think about how you can use a corner or a portion of a die cut stamped image to make that flap kind of interesting for the front of your card. Okay, back to the project. So I've got the flap lined up here, and I want to add a little bit of color to that stamped image. So I just did some really basic coloring with some Copic markers here, just a couple shades of blue and a couple shades of green. I tried to think of a color scheme that would coordinate well with that turquoise flap that I used on the front of the card. And this is always the fun part. I love the coloring. You can see once you get the formula down for how you need to position and put the score line on these different pieces, you could cut out a bunch of these in advance. And then really the only work would be coloring things in to make that stamped image pop. Okay, go ahead and fit that flap on top and you are all done. It's just a great way to highlight a custom cut image using that die cut flap on the front of the card, and can be done in so many different ways. I used a bunch of sentiments from the stamp sets that I mentioned in today's video to add a little message to the front of these cards, but you could hide them underneath the flap if you wanted to. All right, everyone, thanks so much for stopping by today. I hope you learned a few things, and keep on crafting.